Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. A lot of people have gone out to Faire, and I've only worked with a small percentage of them. But one of them is here with me today, and he was a total gentleman on stage. He was a pleasure to be with. He always was understated and clever, which is not a combination you often come across on the stage of the Renaissance Fair. I'm talking, of course, about my good friend, Gary Randall. Gary, welcome.
Hi, Dan. Glad to be here. Thanks for asking me.
So we're going to start off with a traditional Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who was the person who said to you, there's a thing called Fair? And what did they say to get you out there?
Well, can I give you a sort of a long answer?
Sure.
I grew up in Thousand Oaks, and I was always aware of the fair. Young as I was, I think it started in '67 or so, and we knew about it mostly because of the character actor Walter Brennan and his wife would be writing letters to the editor in the Caneo, the Acorn, I think it was called, and about these no good hippies doing drugs. And it was the Renaissance Fair this and the Renaissance Fair that. And one year, actually, the Renaissance Fair was in Thousand Oaks proper at the corner of Thousand Oaks Boulevard and Westlake Boulevard. And I went there with my mother and my brother in 1968, and it was really a hoot. That was at Agura. So I was aware of the fair, and then I went back much later when I was going to a two-year college called Moore Park. We took our costumes and wore them there. This James Thurber play called Many Moons, and I had this black outfit that went head to toe, black velvet. It was summer, and I roasted. Anyway, much later, probably 21 at the time, I was doing a play at the Caneo Players. I'd been doing plays there, building scenery for 5 years. And I was doing a play with Stephen Zweifler. It was called Sing Out Sweet Land. It was the bicentennial of the US. So our season was all Americana. So this was American folk songs and things like that. And so, but one night after the show, Stephen came up to me and he said, "Hey, how'd you like to come to the Renaissance Fair and be my manservant?" And that's something that very few people have ever said to me. However, I think I said something like, "Well, okay." And so I showed up, and going to the fair is different if you're going to the fair as a participant or as a spectator. It's different. And I showed up. We met at the main stage. They had us go off to other areas. I think we wound up going to the Witches Wood. Anyway, that's how I got to the Renaissance Fair back then.
Can I ask you a question that doesn't immediately follow, but I think in my brain it does? After Fair, I followed you on Facebook, and it seems your family has a connection to what I consider old Hollywood. Your family seems to have known a lot of actors and directors from, say, Hollywood's golden era. Is that true?
Oh, yes.
Could you?
My grandmother, Ruth, her brother was Kenneth Peach Sr., and he goes all the way back to, he worked on King Kong. And then he worked on some serials. And I have a newspaper article about my grandmother and Kenny. She was sewing doll clothes to put on this miniature ship that they were going to blow up in a pool for some serial. And the beauty of this day and age is I was able to go on YouTube and find that exact serial and see the ship blowing up. Right, that was my grandmother building, making those costumes, and I saw that on YouTube. And but Kenny went on to he worked with Hal Roach, and he did many Our Gang and also Laurel and Hardy's. He did probably one of the better Laurel and Hardy's called Sons of the Desert, where they went to the convention and didn't want to tell the wives about it. He was doing television. He was in his 80s and he was doing Cheers and he was doing Taxi and Angie. And I worked with him when I started. I was in the set lighting and he requested me and I worked on Rhoda. And that was a lot of fun. It was good to work for Kenny. And so we have that. Then we have Kenny Jr., who passed away also. We have Marty Peach, his son. Yeah, the Peaches were in show business, and yeah, and Kenny Jr. worked on Lost in Space and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and all kinds of stuff. My father was primarily in going to movie sets. Like when we moved to Thousand Oaks, we were just driving around. We went to what is now called Wildwood, but back then it was called Jan's Ranch. And that's where they did Spartacus. We went there and they had a whole Western town built, Flaming Star, Elvis Presley's, I think one of his first movies. And in that area, they built all kinds of Western sets, and that's where I used to play as a kid. And my parents, my father encouraged me to do movies. And when I went to do the Caneo Players, he sometimes helped me build sets, so that was kind of fun too. And he was quite a guy. He passed away the end of 2020. Really miss him a lot.
So I guess the connection I'm making is that when young Gary said, I want to go and work at the Conejo Players, nobody reacted with horror like no one had ever worked in show business before in your family.
No, no, I saw an article in the paper that said they're having tryouts for Brigadoon. So I ran over there and I thought I was a good singer, but I was wrong. I was a horrible singer. And so they gave me a part as Sandy, the candy merchant. My solo was, "The all of you come to Sandy here, come over to Sandy's booth. I'm selling the sweetest candy here that ever shook loose a tooth. I eat it myself, and there's no doubt 'tis creamy and gut and thick. So all of you come and buy me out. It's making me kind of sick." We learned to dance, and I still have all those photos, and I've gone there occasionally to visit with some of the older people. So I did a lot of plays there as an actor, but then I don't know, I went on the weekend and started building sets. And there was a man still there in his 90s named Dick Johnson, who was the tech director. He also worked for KHJ Channel 9. He was a producer down there. And one of the things he did was the Seymour show, Fright Night. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
it was a predecessor of Elvira.
He was like a tall guy, gaunt
Oh
with a
yeah,
raincoat or something.
oh yeah, he had a cape.
Yeah.
And in fact, the same brickwork we did, or rock work we did for Brigadoon, was also used for his so-called slimy wall set that Dick Johnson he built. And so what I would do is they'd ask for some props and I'd run them down and I'd work on that show for a little bit. And that was really cool. And Larry Vincent, who played Seymour, was a lot of fun. But then, yeah, I started doing set design. And when I was probably 17, they let me design my first play, which was called Sound of Murder. And I don't know, I did several plays for them there. And I also worked at the Horizon Players and did some work at the Moore Park College. And I really enjoyed that sort of work. But when I was going to Moore Park College, I was taking a lot of theater. A friend of mine called me, somebody I knew from the Caneo Players, and said that they're accepting what is called permit workers in the movie business in set lighting. And so I went down and long story short, I started working on movies as an electrician. And I did that for nearly 16 years.
Was
And
that
I
a way
got
to get around the unions or something, or like a trainee position type of thing?
No, I was in the union. Well, then it was called when there's too many people needed and they run out of people in the union, they hire what is called a permit. You're permitted to work. And we were all called 90-day wonders because you had to have so many years or months or whatever before you had made a group one. Well, we just worked so much and everything. I think this producers signed something, and we all just became group ones almost immediately. And all the older people hated us. Oh my God, they couldn't stand us. And that's when they started allowing people of color and women in also. And it had been primarily blue collar and hard drinking guys, but it's all different now.
So anyway, back to you and the fair.
Anyway.
I saw you on the fair. It was primarily with David and the Elixir of Life show.
Hmm.
And there was David and Theo were sort of the two main protagonists. And you and Claudette were sort of the wily servant helpers.
Right.
And I would say no one is going to out bombast David and Theo. And so what you chose as a, I guess, coping mechanism is that you went soft, you went slower, but you had sort of this squeaky Popeye the Sailor Man muttering under your breath kind of thing. And for those who didn't see you in the Elixir of Life, you were sort of a demented Vanna White. You know, you pulled things out of the bag and displayed them and when called for. First of all, is that correct? Was that the choices you were making?
Oh
And
yeah, no, that makes yeah, that was because David, I was really in awe of David. David was probably the finest improvisational actor I've ever met. He could stop in the middle of the fair and give a performance without anything. And he was amazing. And my first run-in with David was when I guess we went to the Witch's Wood to have I was in the court initially. And so we all met at the court, and then we would practice walking the streets with everybody. I was with Stephen, my lord, and I started chattering away. And then David was with us, and he turned and he said, "Do you always let your servants talk in your presence?" And I was like, "Oh, these people are strict." And I remember that from David. And we had a lot of history. I mean, he's my oldest friend, period. I've known David for 50 years. I was around 20 or 21 when I did the fair, and now I'm 70 and a half. So by the time we did the Elixir show, we were pretty good friends. I mean, I think that was probably 3 or 4 years after I started doing the fair.
did David write it, or did you all just sort of get together in somebody's living room and come up with stuff?
We had the best time at Theo's rent-controlled apartment on Second Street in Santa Monica. It was a gorgeous little place. Sit in the little kitchen dining nook area, usually with some wine or something on a Friday night. I think we met maybe 2 or 3 times, and we just had the best time ever. We just howled. We came up with all these little things. And then I was kind of the prop guy because that's what I did. So I started making the props. Like I cast my arm in foam rubber for the leper part, and I did it was like a little portable backdrop that we let go that unrolled that we had holes cut for our faces like you see at carnivals, and I did all those props and things like that.
Did you
And
build a syringe?
no, I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that came from.
Well, that was a reliable laugh.
That was great. And we just got together and we did all that stuff and we tried it the first time. And I think the first time it did pretty good. At one point, it was like the Rocky Horror Show because people would come to see it and they knew all the lines and they'd say them with us. So that was kind of fun that we had that kind of notoriety.
Do you
So,
have a particular line or bit that you remember with fondness of the show?
well, we would be anachronistic as all get up because I think that really played well with the audiences because we slip in some stuff that is contemporary and they feel like they're in on the joke. Like when I came up as a leper with my rubber arm and David would shake my hand and walk away with my hand in his hand, like, and look at it and go, ooh. And then he'd come back and say, lend me your ear. And he'd grab my ear and like pretend like he like pulled it off. And then I would scream and go, oh no, now I'm a deaf leper. And the audience would go, oh, and then I would give them the fist. And they love that. They love to be included like that. So that was probably one of my favorite things. And then what we did the Welsh dancing, which was wonderful.
Welsh
Uh,
dancing, yes. I
yeah,
did an interview with Theo, and we spent a lot of time extolling the virtues and memories of Welsh dancing.
it was well. The Elixir Life show was it was really like a Warner Brother cartoon with Bugs Bunny or something.
But getting back to how you sort of made the choice to, because the reason why I'm sort of persisting on this is you did a commedia with us, right?
Right.
And you said, sort of under your breath, one of the funniest lines I've ever encountered at the Renaissance Fair on a stage or
Do
on the
tell.
street for that matter. And I don't know, even know if you remember it because it was just a thrown away line for those of you who weren't there 50 years ago. We were doing a commedia and Mark was Flavio, but he had to go to Europe that summer. And so we had sort of guest Flavios come in, and you were one of them. And like I said, you had this sort of Popeye the Sailor Man. You're always saying things under your voice. And it wasn't quite clear if you meant anybody to hear them because they were not like big lines that you were shouting out to the audience. And I don't remember what the setup was, which probably makes this a more pointless story. For some reason, you started in an Italian accent saying California city names like, oh, Santa Maria, oh, Santa Catalina. And then for some reason, you always ended up with, oh, Santa Monica, like it was a curse. It was so brilliant in that it worked for a 20th century audience, and it was also plausible as a 16th century joke.
Mhm.
And it was like the most economical line I've ever heard. And it would always get a laugh, and it was always unexpected. I mean, it was everything you wanted a joke to be. It sort of came out of left field, and then you never, like, you didn't milk it. You you just said it and went on. But I've waited 50 years to ask you about that bit. I don't know if you remember coming up with that line or how you came up with the idea of, as an Italian, saying California Spanish city names as like a stream of consciousness kind of thing.
Well, I don't remember a lot about that, but I will say I probably had no rehearsal time, and they probably gave me stuff to say, and probably the under my breath was probably because I was a little insecure about what I was doing. But when you're doing the fair, you just do whatever. What I do remember also was that after we were done, Sandy tracked me down and gave me like a silver mug for doing that. That was really kind of him. But I'm glad you enjoyed it because I had such a great time doing all that stuff. I mean, it seems like at fair they grab you and you run over here and you fill in over here or do over there. Or you're always doing shows
You were
and
not given a lot of prep time by us. I think it was
yeah,
just, have you seen the show? Sure. You're Flavio.
yeah,
This
I
is
was fearless. If you're doing the fair, you were fearless. You were just doing everything. I would have second thoughts about doing anything like that now, like running in and being in a show. But back then, it was so
what's kind
magical.
of weird is that on one hand, there was a certain looseness to the whole thing. And at the same time, there was a lot of craft going on.
Mhm.
So we could feel comfortable going to a fellow performer who knew the ethos of what we're doing and sort of an idea of the script, and but knew the Lotsie, we could be comfortable knowing that you are going to do great at it and enjoy being on stage with you. But we've drifted off a bit. Let's get back to your overall Faire career arc.
Initially, I got in doing the court, and I had a great time with David. He was Christopher Hatton in the court, and we had Patrick Duffy, a really great actor, funny guy. We would meet in Witch's Wood, and it was the court was hysterical. And this is 76. It seemed like at the end of the day, we had three guys who were in costume, but they were sitting in the hay bale. They were spectators, but they fit in. And it turned out that they were Greg Brown and Kevin Brown and another person, I forget who that was. And all those people wound up becoming integral part of the fair. But anyway, court was very fun then. And then I got an invitation to do Northern Fair from Patrick Duffy. And then I couldn't make it, but I really wanted to do it again. So the next year came, I was asked to join the court, and I did. And court seemed different without those people. David wasn't doing it, and Patrick wasn't doing it. There were other people in the court, but
Can I interrupt real quick? Did you ever work with Louisa Puig?
no, I didn't work with her. When I was doing court, it was Peg Long, who I thought was just a wonderful, just terrifying, but wonderful. So anyway, like I said, the court wasn't sort of my cup of tea the second year. And in fact, I got into some kind of a row with somebody. He was like the head guy of the court. I don't know who that was, but he sent a couple of his guys down to get me and rough me up, threw me in the washing well, and I was just beside myself. So David and I were, we talked to each other, and I said, "Hey, what would it cost me to have you throw a pie at somebody, hit somebody in the face with a pie?" Because I thought that kind of made sense. And he said, "2 beers." And so I said, "Okay, you're on." And so a week later, this guy came up to me, all dressed in black ninja outfit. He said, "Your Honor, your pastry is ready." And I said, "David, is that you?" He said, "Yes." And so David, and he was doing the halberdiers then. He and all the halberdiers were like looking for this guy. And I was there watching, and nothing happened. And later on, David found that guy up on one of the roads and hit him. And later on, that guy came up to me and he said, "Shaving cream hurts in the eyes or stings." And he was pissed at me. And I thought, "Oh, Christ. And I think it was the last day. I think it was the last day. All this time, I've been watching the halberdiers. The halberdiers, if you don't know, were very much like, there was a TV show in the 60s called F Troop. And it was a comedic town militia. They called themselves the Tottenham Halberdiers. A halber is a long pole with a axe at the top. The Tottenham Halberdiers. I thought they were brilliant. They were so funny because they would stop in the middle of the street and start doing some kind of an event. All the women in the group, they would act as barriers for the spectators so nobody got hurt. Sometimes there were fake sword fights and things like that. Or they'd be marching, and David, whose character was Captain Ned Courage, which I thought was hysterical, he would say, "Company, halt." And the guy in the front of the line would stop, and then 20 other people would pancake into him, just like a Warner Brother cartoon. And with the pie episode and last day, I thought, screw this, I'm going to go join the Halberdiers. And that's what I did. A week later, I got a really upsetting letter from somebody in the court that I was basically fired. But I'd quit. And I wasn't getting any money. I think I was getting a couple of food tickets for like, I don't know, $4 worth of food, which at the Renaissance Fair got you like a So anyway, so that was my adios to the court, and I really liked a lot of those people too. It was kind of heartbreaking, but I went on, and a lot of times in life you go where the path takes you, and the path happened to take me to the Halberdiers, and so I did the Halberdiers. I think we did that for like 2 years or 3 years, and that's someplace in that process. That's when we started doing that Elixir show. And so when I say the Halberdiers gave birth to a lot of those shows, a lot of the people that were in the Halberdiers went off, like yourself, went off to do other shows and use that same humor. At the fair, I thought the Reeves Tale was brilliant, kind of classic theater, but for most part, nuance didn't work well at the fair, in my opinion.
Right.
True Shakespeare didn't work. You had to include the audience. You had to make it broad. You had to, and that's what we do with the Halberdiers, and that's why I said the Halberdiers gave birth to all these others, because they took that sort of humor and that theatrics out into the rest of the population. The reduced Shakespeare company. I remember Adam Long when he was very young, and yeah, he started doing that stuff too.
Well, you mentioned Warner Brothers. I think everybody in the Halberdiers regarded the Warner Brother cartoon as the what you were shooting for. Louder, faster, funnier, and if you could be incongruous,
Oh,
all the more power to you.
well, we'd start up at Procession Hill in the morning and usually have something vile like peppermint schnapps because it kind of tasted like mouthwash. We'd go running down the hill, down to the main gate. And that's where, on a good day, we'd run into the Celts. And the Celts were like a biker club. They weren't going for the comedy. They were serious mother effers. They'd come marching up the hill with those axes on high and screaming. And occasionally we would have some kind of improvisation with them. But I remember one guy had this stuffed raccoon, and we talked about playing coon ball. We met up with the Scots, and they were giving us shit. And so finally somebody started going coon ball, coon ball, and then everybody's going coon ball, coon ball, and then we had this improvisation of playing sort of like football with this stuffed raccoon, and it was, oh my god! And they I think they just got tired of us and they screamed and went trudging back up the hill again. But that was so much fun, and that was true theater. It was Monty Python. That was, speaking of Monty Python, one of the things about doing the fair, my first fair is, I went to Newbury Park High School. I think we had one person of color in the whole school, but I was into Monty Python. Nobody heard about Monty Python, and I liked English films, and I liked all this stuff that nobody I went to school had any idea what. And so I go to the fair, and everybody knows that stuff, and everybody knows Steel Eye Span. That's when I started going off, and I went to some meetings of the Society of Creative Anachronism, SCA. I had no idea that, you find your tribe, and then you find that there's all kinds of sub tribes. That was probably one of the best parts of doing the fair, was finding my likes. Like back then, there's all these amazing personalities. There was a guy named Dundee. Dundee was a tall, black-haired man. Maybe he had a beard. He was a dancer, but he was like really scary to me. I mean, I was a little, like a young kid, and him, and there was Patrick Porter, was it? He would play the character named El Principe. He had a pavilion with so-called Italian noblewomen, and they had these fans, and when they showed you the backside of the fan, it was these really erotic pictures that they had drawn. And anyway, all these images, all these things of the fair just made it such a unique and magical place to be and experience these things.
Well, there was the environment itself. I mean, it was hot, it was outdoors, it was dusty, and that was part of the fair too, in that we're in a different time and a place, that you weren't at home in a air conditioned
Well,
house.
and this thing was when we did the Queen's procession, the first year I did it, and I wasn't wearing my glasses because my glasses weren't period. And I'm marching through the dust with the Elizabethan band playing. And for a few seconds, you feel like you've gone back in time because you smell sweat, you smell real, you smell sweaty. And there you look around and people looking great and made up with all the costumes. And it was just wonderful. The other day I heard that at the fair now in Irwindale, you're not allowed to sleep overnight. And I thought, what's the point? What's the point? If you can't sleep overnight, I mean, that was probably one of the greatest things was sleeping overnight because that's when everybody, you get to hear everybody's story. You get to talk to people, and then somebody will say, "Have you heard the storyteller?" And you say, "What?" "Yeah, the storyteller. He's up at the camp there. He tells stories." And so you go up there and you go, and there's like this whole little camping area. There's guys got a hammock up in the trees, and you couldn't have fires, so there's like lanterns with batteries, and then Mark Lewis came out and told stories. And oh my God, that was so great. And then the night shows, one point, Elixir of Life and Paramus and Thisbe, we did a night show that was a burlesque theme where we wore baggy pants. We had an actual stripper. Back then you could do that. You could do all kinds of stuff. The exotic erotic underwear contest, that was pretty good. And that lasted until I think somebody got hurt and then they had to close that down. In the morning, you have those great omelets and it's the fair was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
Can you recall a time when you were working in a non-fair environment where you used that sort of feeling of fair confidence in a non-fair environment?
Yeah. When I did one of my first Roger Corman films, like I said, I'd been a set electrician for years. And then I was I was working on a movie called Scrooge with this wonderful production designer named Michael Riva, just a brilliant man. He did a lot of films, and I was following him around all the time, asking him questions. I go up to his office, and because I really still wanted to do sets, because that's what I really started to do, but I got a little sidetracked. But one day he just turned to me and he said, "If you really want to be an art director, you have to stop being an electrician." It's funny because a week later I was at a party and I met a person that worked for Roger Corman. And I went to, and I told him what I wanted to do. And he said, bring your book. And I did. And so a week later, they had me working at Roger Corman's little studio on Main Street in Venice. And I started doing this movie called Transylvania Twist with the director was named Jim Wynorski. We still talk, and it was hysterical. And it was just like the Renaissance Fair in terms of we're working all day and playing all night and doing something that was absolutely crazy and fun. It was just it's like Young Frankenstein, only didn't have their money, but we had all these great actors, all these great TV actors, character actors, Howard Morris, Steve Frankel. Couldn't wait to go to work every day. When I talked to the director, Jim Wynorski, he feels the same way. He's still working, but we had such a great time. So, in answer to your question, yeah, that was that.
What do you think contributes to that sense of fun, yet work, yet and wanting to do it, say, 24 hours a day? And so, is there a way that you think that feeling of fair fun can be created outside of the fair?
Yeah, I mean, if you work with some people and you all have the same intentions, you have the same drive, and you love the art that you're doing, and you're doing something that is that tickles you.
I'm going to
Uh,
suggest something,
oh,
and you might well laugh at me. So feel free to disagree with the premise of my question. But you talk about everybody working together for a common goal kind of thing. To what extent do you think that the Pattersons dream of recreating the Renaissance contributed to the spirit of the fair that everybody was responding to?
wow, that's a great question. Um, Boy, first of all, I think the Pattersons were brilliant. Their idea was brilliant because look at it, look what they did.
Right.
They a lot of people show up on their own dime. I mean, people were spending serious money on costumes that they weren't getting paid for, but they created something that attracted a certain kind of person. And that's what you have to do. And it was a family and it was a tribe, and everybody that showed up was into it. And you didn't have to stay there. Nobody's forcing you to be there. I was there from 1976 to 1984. And I don't regret it a single year I was there. And I have made friends and have friendships with people like yourself that has gone on and on and on. I talked to David Springhorn 2 days ago. We talk all the time, and unfortunately, every now and then we have somebody goes to Sky Fair, and when Kevin Brown left us, we had that great meeting at Memorial at the Elks Lodge. Was I don't think it was a memorial. We just all like stood around and talked. I don't think there was like a formal memorial or anything like that. We just stood around and talked about us, about our lives, and about what you're doing now, and Kevin and things like that. And we lost somebody else, Sandy Grin, very recently. It's a family, and that's what the Pattersons created. They created a place where you could be that and do that. Northern Fair was everything that the Southern Fair was. My sense is Northern Fair was more. I don't know why. In the early years when I went up there, we'd take a bus. They got a bus for the Southern Fair people, and go up and stop in Buttonwillow, which is the epitome of a truck stop. In fact, when you look at the dictionary and you see truck stop, there's a picture of Buttonwillow, and stop there and then go all the way, get up to the fair around 4 in the morning, sleep for a couple hours, get up and do the fair. That's a really good role model. I think most employers would love to have that role model. You get people to work for pretty much nothing, spend all night long on a bus. And it was because we got to be with each other. For me, that was the real draw, was I got to be with all these people. And up at Northern Fair, after a day on the dusty road, we'd go over to Shamui Gardens, which was this hot tub emporium. They had cedar, round hot tubs, and Denise Cooper would bring the apricot scrub, and we'd all get butt naked and go in the hot tub and scrub our faces down. And later on, we'd go, maybe go as Theo Katzoff and find a steakhouse. I remember doing that in Fairfax. Then also we had the Ifitala Bologna Commedia, hung out with those guys up in San Francisco. I just think of all those times. It really gave me and it opened up my world.
Can
I
I
could,
offer a
yeah,
hypothesis?
go ahead.
When I compare, say, a place like Disneyland, which is also like an environmental theater, it's a place you go to and interact with. What I say is that Disneyland is very top down. They have a very much a vision of how you can fit into it, and you have to fit into it, into their script. What I found compelling about the fair was that it was sort of from the bottom up. The Pattersons sort of had this vision of a Renaissance village, and then everybody could just sort of fit into that and brought their own creativity. The Pattersons didn't write the Elixir show and went around and said, David, find some friends to do this, or hired you and David and Theo and Claudette. But by giving a framework and then letting people fill it in kind of how they wanted to, made for a very coherent organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look at Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live started when I did the Faire, when I did my first Faire in '76. All these years later, they're still on television. I think any kind of an organization that is that loose. Yeah, the Faire was people were writing bits, creating things. Look
And
at
then they
like
had a place to do them. I mean, it
yeah.
wasn't just like Gary and Dan in their houses in Woodland Hills and Moore Park coming up with these funny little bits.
Oh yeah,
We
they
could
lock
then
us
go
up.
out and that we had an audience presented to us that we could play with and grow with.
Right. No, and that worked. It worked really well, and I really admired them for that. And they also did, well, Southern Fair, Northern Fair, they did the Dickens Fair. It was quite an operation. Everybody that I did the fair with loves that stuff, love historical dramas, comedies. It was a brilliant idea. What was it, 1966 or so, in somebody's backyard?
I heard it's now a racquetball club on off of Coengo, this side of the first fair, KPFK
Mm.
fundraiser kind of thing. When you are kind enough to say you were willing to do this, was there a part of your brain that says, I gotta be sure to mention so and so that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I'll mention Noel. I wrote his last name down because I can't pronounce it. Gillingham? No, we did the first fair together, and for some reason, he is my archivist. Every now and then, he will send me a picture that I have never seen of me in 1976. He only did that one fair, but he's on all these Facebook pages about the fair, and so I need to shout out to him. But I also, the one thing that is on my mind that is a great thing was toward the end of the fair in 1984, I just was not doing well. I had a lot of life things. Life was becoming very lifey, as a friend says. And yeah, I was not doing well. And anyway, but I had an epiphany and all that changed, and that's all different now. But I think around 10 years ago, I heard that Bob Wright had passed away. He played Lord Burleigh, who I knew, from the first fair I did, and his wife Margie, and liked them a lot. And there's some of the fair that the people in the fair that I had a lot of fun interacting with when I was doing court. Anyway, I heard that there was a memorial for him up in Stockton, where they lived, which is it's a good 6 hour drive or 5 hour drive. And I had this thought that I should go up there and just, visit. And so I did, and I ran into Noel, who I just mentioned, and I ran into Denise Cooper, that was our den mother in the Halberdiers, and among other things, Denise, and so it was yeah, memorial for Bob, and I saw his wife Margie there, and I walked up and I sat next to her, and she looked at me and she went, "Gary Randall, how are you?" I had no idea she'd remember me. It was, then it was like 30 years, 40 years. I told her I'm doing really well, and she looked at me and she said, "As I recall, you had a drinking problem." Which, that's an icebreaker. And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "What did you do about it?" I said, "Well, I met some people that helped me with that, and I don't have that issue anymore." And she said, "Well, back then I was praying for you because I have 40 years of not drinking myself now." And that just stunned me. And I left that memorial just feeling like my interaction with the fair had a nice ending to it, had nicely been, had a nice ending. And and I'm glad I went up there. And so I'm glad that happened. And I love the fair, still love the fair. I would do it again. I've thought about that, doing the fair again. You can't do the fair. What I really came up with the other day, because I thought about going to Irwindale, or I thought about going to Devore. And actually, I went to Devore. I drove down there, and it took me like an hour and a half to get there, an hour to get through the traffic, go through the lines. I think I stayed there maybe half an hour and left. And the same thing with Irwindale. I went there with, I met Mark Conlon, who left us a few years ago. I met him there. We went to see David. David had a booth there where he did sold magical charms and things. And we were there, and I was there maybe an hour and left, because the magic was gone, for me. And also, when we did the fair, there were all these great people. Like I mentioned, Patrick Porter. I mean, all these interesting people. They might, I'm sure there's still interesting people out there, but we had hippies. We still had 1976, there were still hippies out there, like a lot of like kumbaya people and magical mystery, magicians. And yeah, I don't know if you could do the fair again the way it was. It's a whole nother era. It's a whole nother thing.
Well,
What do you,
actually, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit.
okay?
Because when I've gone out to fair, I have found more than hints of the former fair. And I think it speaks to the skill of the Pattersons in setting up this dream that has sort of self-perpetuated itself. I mean, there's still a lot of street people doing, I mean, sometimes they're still doing the stuff that we were doing 50 years ago.
Mhm,
Sometimes they're doing variations of it. But if you
mhm.
go into a fair now, there'll be this 16-year-old girl thrusting a fish head into your face going, God, you good den, buy my fish or something, there's still that kind of weird vibe of you're being invited into a different place vibe to it. And I find that. And then when I see everybody looks like they're in high school to me at this point,
Yeah,
and they're
right.
doing an improv fractured fairy tales.
Mm.
And you can see the one girl that's like taking it seriously and trying to do it. You see a couple that are just flopping around. You're not quite sure what they're doing. I mean, it's all the same kind of place to explore and do just weird stuff that entertains. I find actually going to fair, I'm not going to meet many people I know, but I recognize the spirit in which things are being done.
Right.
That's kind of where I'm coming from. So at any rate, let me give you my last final question on Fair Folk at Work, which is sort of a role play question, but it's okay, congratulations. You have just been awarded the highly coveted Phyllis Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fair Skills Applied to Life. The band has been told to sit on its hands, and you have as much time as you like. Give me your acceptance speech.
Well, I want to thank Phyllis and Ron Patterson for this honor. When I came to the fair, I was somewhat lost. I didn't know where I was going, and you taught me some very valuable skills on dealing with people, on having a good time, on being responsible, showing up to do my commitments that I was doing. And I learned some life skills and people skills, and I will take this award and put it proudly on my mantle and think about you every time I see it. So thank you.
I think I can stop recording now. That's a take or a wrap or whatever you want to call it. Well, that was my May 2024 interview with Gary Randall. I'm Dan McLaughlin, and this has been another episode of Fair Folk at Work. Questions or comments for Gary that you'd like me to pass along can be emailed to me at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments to me about the podcast can also be emailed to me at djng@earthlink.net. Finally, if you or somebody you know would like to be a guest at Fairfolk at Work, you can email me at djng@earthlink.net. That's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.